Hey guys. Tonight we drift back to a place where the air feels thick enough to chew. Where the Mississippi exhales warm breath into narrow streets. And where gas lamps blur into halos as if the city itself is already a little drunk. You're standing in New Orleans in the 1890s, no air conditioning. No antibiotics. No social safety net, just heat. Music. And a set of rules that quietly decide who gets to live long and who absolutely does not. You take one step forward and your shoes stick to the pavement. Somewhere nearby, a piano is practicing the same 4 bars. Over and over, like it's trying to remember a happier life. And as you look around, you get the sense that if you were dropped here without warning, yeah, you probably wouldn't survive. Not for long, not comfortably, maybe not at all. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, tell me down in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. I always like imagining these stories drifting across time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin walking, not fast. No one rushes in this heat, but with purpose. Because standing still just lets the sweat win. The city around you is alive in layers. Above ground, it's laughter, perfume, spilled whiskey, and the clatter of carriage wheels. Underneath, though, there's something else: rot, risk, and a kind of quiet math where some lives are counted carefully and others are treated like rounding errors. You don't know it yet, but simply by being a woman without money here, you are already on a short list the city doesn't bother to protect. New Orleans in the 1890s likes to sell itself as indulgent but tolerant. Sinful but charming. You can drink, gamble, dance, and disappear all in one night. Tourists, well, the 1890s version of tourists, call it freedom. But you're about to learn that freedom in this city is not evenly distributed. It flows downhill, toward men with cash in their pockets and lawyers in their address books. If you're a woman selling sex, that flow skips right over you, like water around a stone. You hear people say that prostitution has always existed here, as naturally as the river. That's the popular historical story, the one that sounds almost comforting. But the less popular truth is that by the 1890s, the system surrounding it has become dangerously organized. Not safe, not regulated in any modern sense. Just organized enough to trap people inside it. Historians still debate whether this structure was accidental or deliberately engineered to keep certain women contained, controlled, and ultimately disposable. You pass a row of buildings with carefully washed fronts, lace curtains, painted doors, a place that pretends to be respectable until you notice the men entering alone and leaving a little unsteady. This is where the city draws an invisible line. On one side, polite society pretends not to see. On the other, women like you are expected to absorb everything: desire, violence, disease, blame, and ask for nothing in return. It's a bit like being the city's unofficial trash can. Except the trash can occasionally gets arrested for existing in the wrong place. What makes this especially lethal is timing. You're here at a moment when medicine is confident but wrong. Doctors believe they understand disease. They really don't. Germ theory is still fighting for credibility. And treatments for sexually transmitted infections range from useless to actively murderous. Mercury is popular. Needles are reused. Pain is considered instructive. You start to realize that the danger isn't just the work. It's what happens when the work inevitably makes you sick. And sick you will get. That's not pessimism, that's math. Condoms exist, technically, but they're unreliable, unpopular, and often refused by clients who hold the power in every transaction. Saying no is not a protected right. It's a negotiation with consequences. Sometimes the consequence is violence. Sometimes it's hunger. Sometimes it's being thrown out onto the street with nowhere else to go. Modern people like to imagine choice here, but it's the kind of choice where all the doors lead to the same dark hallway. You notice how rarely women laugh with their whole bodies. Smiles are careful. Posture is practiced. Even rest feels temporary, like sleeping with one eye open. There's a common myth that New Orleans prostitutes were glamorous, dripping in silk and independence. The truth is quieter and sadder. Most are young, many are desperate, some are children by modern standards, and nearly all of them are one illness away from being erased. The city keeps records, taxes, permits, arrests, but deaths slip through cracks. A woman dies of infection? She drank too much. A woman collapses after a treatment? She was weak. A woman disappears? She moved on. The paperwork shrugs. Historians still debate how many deaths were directly caused by medical mistreatment versus the conditions that made mistreatment inevitable. Either way, the outcome is the same: fewer women, less noise, more space for the next ones. You pause, leaning against a wall that radiates the day's heat back into your bones. Somewhere, someone jokes that this is just how things are. You almost laugh, because every cruel system in history says that exact line. It's practically a catchphrase. If this were a modern workplace, it would be printed on a motivational poster, right above a picture of a swamp sunset. As night thickens, you feel it settle into your shoulders. This isn't a story about scandal. It's a story about structure. About how a city can smile while building a machine that quietly kills the people it relies on. You don't fully understand it yet, but you will. Step by step, breath by breath, and by the time the music fades, you'll know exactly why being a harlot here isn't just dangerous. It's a death sentence, delivered slowly, with perfect manners. You keep walking, because stopping invites questions, and questions invite attention, and attention here has weight. The street widens slightly, enough for two carriages to pass without colliding, which feels like a small civic miracle. New Orleans calls this progress. You call it a reminder that the city knows exactly how to make space when it wants to. It just rarely wants to make it for you. This is a city built on vice, but not in the fun, neon-lit way modern people imagine. There are no ironic cocktail menus explaining the sins. There's just an understanding, unspoken but precise, that certain pleasures will be tolerated because they grease the gears of commerce. Gambling keeps money moving. Alcohol keeps tempers loose. Sex keeps men satisfied enough not to ask inconvenient questions. You're not a citizen in this economy. You're a utility. People say the city allows prostitution, as if permission is generosity. What it really does is box it in, tax it, observe it, and pretend that doing so equals control. Brothels are tolerated not because anyone cares about the women inside them, but because keeping desire contained feels safer than letting it roam. Historians still debate whether this tolerance was a genuine attempt at harm reduction or simply a convenient way to manage male behavior without inconveniencing men themselves. The paper trail leans toward convenience. You notice how openly men talk about where they're going tonight. No whispers, no shame. A banker adjusts his tie. A dockworker wipes his hands on his pants. Different worlds, same destination. No one worries about their reputations. That's the first quiet lesson the city teaches you. Morality here is directional. It flows away from men and sticks to women like humidity. The money involved is real. And that's what gives the system its false legitimacy. Brothels pay fees. Madams pay bribes. Doctors charge for examinations. Police accept fines that never make it into official books. It looks like order. It feels like bureaucracy. But underneath, it's a loop designed to extract value from your body until there's nothing left worth collecting. Think of it like a subscription service you can never cancel. Except the product is you. And the refund policy is death. You pass a bar where laughter spills out in waves. Someone inside tells a joke about a girl who caught something she shouldn't have. The punchline lands. Glasses clink. You don't hear anyone ask what happened to her afterward. That part isn't funny. Apparently. The city prefers its humor detached from consequences. Like a magic trick where the assistant never reappears. One of the stranger facts, one that doesn't make it into the romantic retellings, is how openly civic leaders discuss prostitution in terms of urban hygiene. Not moral hygiene, literal hygiene. They talk about women like drainage problems. Something to be routed away from respectable neighborhoods. Keep it contained, they say, and the rest of the city stays clean. It's an elegant theory, except for one inconvenient flaw. Disease doesn't respect zoning laws. You feel that flaw everywhere. In the way women flinch at a cough. In the way gloves are worn long past their usefulness. In the way mirrors are avoided on bad days. Syphilis and gonorrhea are common, feared, and profoundly misunderstood. Doctors debate causes with confidence that feels almost aggressive. Some blame women's bodies themselves, as if anatomy is a moral failing. Others insist the illness comes from excess, from indulgence, from weakness. No one suggests that maybe forcing thousands of men through a small, desperate population of women might be the problem. That would be awkward. You hear a phrase repeated often, necessary evil. It's said with a shrug. The way people talk about taxes or summer storms. Necessary for whom? You wonder. Evil for whom? The math is simple enough to do in your head. Even in this heat, the benefits move upward. The risks stay with you. If this were a modern corporate structure, it would be described as efficient. Right before a scandal breaks and everyone claims ignorance. As you walk, you notice the absence of older women. Not entirely absent, just rare. Like a species that didn't make the environmental cut. When you do see them, they move differently, carefully. They've learned how to disappear in plain sight. Survival here doesn't look like triumph. It looks like quiet endurance and a talent for not being noticed. Historians still debate whether those who lasted were luckier, tougher, or simply better at reading danger before it announced itself. There's another myth the city enjoys, that this work offers independence. And yes, Compared to factory labor or domestic service, the money can be faster. But independence without protection is just exposure. You're free to earn, free to spend, free to fall ill, free to be blamed, free in the way a tightrope walker is free without a net. The crowd loves the performance. But no one is catching you if you slip. You overhear a conversation between two men debating whether regulating vice actually reduces crime. They speak like philosophers. You want to interrupt and tell them you're not a theory. You're a body that sweats, bleeds, and gets tired. But you don't. You've learned already that speaking up rarely improves outcomes. It just changes the flavor of the punishment. The city's tolerance comes with a timer you can't see. You are useful while you are healthy, profitable while you are desirable. Once those fade, the tolerance evaporates. That's when arrests happen, or evictions, or quiet suggestions that maybe you should move along. Move where, exactly, is never specified. The river, perhaps, it's always there, patient and wide. As night settles more fully, the vice the city depends on becomes more visible. Lamps glow warmer, doors open more easily, and you feel it now, the sense that this place isn't chaotic at all. It's organized, meticulously so. Every smile, every transaction, every risk has been accounted for, just not in your favor. You keep walking, because the city has more to show you. And you're starting to understand that what makes this life deadly isn't just the danger, it's how calmly everyone accepts it. By now, you've learned how to read the street without looking like you're reading it. Eyes forward, shoulders loose, pace steady. You look like you belong, which in New Orleans is often enough to keep questions away. But belonging is a fragile illusion, especially when you're a woman without a husband, a paycheck without a respectable label, or a family name anyone cares to defend. Protection here is not a right. It's a privilege, and you're not on the list. You start to notice how the law behaves around you. Not how it's written, how it moves. Police officers stroll past brothels with the relaxed posture of men on familiar ground. They nod to madams. They tip their hats to clients. When they look at you, their expressions flatten, as if you've become part of the street furniture. Benches, lamps, women like you, all equally replaceable. Legally, you exist in a strange fog. Prostitution is tolerated, but rarely protected. Assault is a crime, in theory, but reporting it requires credibility. And credibility is something you lose the moment your work becomes known. If a client hits you, steals from you, or worse, the question isn't, "What happened?" It's, "What did you expect?" That question hangs in the air like humidity, clinging to everything. Historians still debate whether this legal ambiguity was intentional or simply a reflection of broader misogyny. But the effect is clear enough. You're alone by design. You think, briefly, about marriage. Many women do. It's not romance, it's insurance. A husband's name is a shield. Without one, you are legally thin, like paper held up to light. Contracts favor men. Courts believe men. Doctors listen to men. Even landlords are more forgiving if there's a male signature involved. Without that, your voice has to shout just to register as sound. Most days, it doesn't bother. One of the crueler facts, rarely mentioned in polite histories, is how often women are pushed into this life by the very systems meant to protect them. Domestic service offers long hours, low pay, and constant vulnerability to abuse. Factories are dangerous and rarely hire women long-term. If you're orphaned, abandoned, or simply unlucky, the path narrows quickly. By the time prostitution appears, it doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like the only door that isn't locked. You hear reformers talk about fallen women, as if gravity itself pulled you down. It's a comforting metaphor for everyone else. If you fell, no one pushed you. If you fell, no one built the staircase wrong. The phrase absolves the city beautifully. Historians still debate whether the language of moral failure was used consciously to deflect responsibility or whether it simply reflected the era's worldview. Either way, it sticks to you, not to the men who pass through your life and leave unchanged. There's a subtle hierarchy even among women here. Those attached to established brothels have slightly more stability than streetwalkers. Those with regular clients fare better than those who don't. Youth buys patience. Beauty buys forgiveness. Illness buys nothing. Once you're visibly unwell, doors close faster. Sympathy evaporates. The city prefers its problems quiet and out of sight. You begin to understand that protection, when it exists at all, is transactional. A madam might step in, if you're profitable. A policeman might look the other way, if you're useful. A doctor might see you quickly, if you can pay. None of it lasts. None of it is guaranteed. It's like renting safety by the hour, knowing the landlord can change the locks at any time. There's a strange modern comparison that almost works. Imagine living in a world where your phone plan covers emergencies, but only if the emergency isn't your fault, and the company decides fault after the fact. That's roughly the level of security you're working with. You laugh softly at the thought, because even that analogy feels too generous. You pass a woman sitting on a stoop, shoes in her lap, rubbing her feet like they've personally betrayed her. She looks up, offers a smile that's half warning, half welcome. No words are exchanged. You don't need them. This place runs on shared understanding. Everyone knows who is protected. Everyone knows who is not. Religion looms in the background. 2. Churches offer charity, but often conditionally. Redemption comes with rules, supervision, repentance performed loudly and repeatedly. Some women take that path and disappear from the district. Others try and come back, quieter than before. Faith can save you, people say. They rarely mention what it costs. As you move deeper into the city's nightly rhythm, you feel the absence of any true safety net. There are no shelters designed for women like you. No clinics that exist without judgment. No courts eager to hear your side. What exists instead is expectation. You are expected to endure. Expected to absorb risk. Expected to vanish if things go wrong. This is how the city makes danger feel ordinary. Not dramatic, not sudden, just constant. A low hum beneath everything. Like the sound of insects at dusk. You realize now that the real threat isn't any single violent moment. It's the knowledge that if something happens to you, the system will respond with a shrug. You keep walking, because walking is safer than stopping. And because now you understand something essential. In 1890s New Orleans, being unprotected isn't an accident. It's a feature. You don't need anyone to tell you that sickness is everywhere. You can feel it in the way people cough into handkerchiefs already stained beyond recognition. In the faint medicinal smells drifting out of boarding houses. In the sudden hush that falls when someone mentions a woman who hasn't been seen for a few weeks. Disease here isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself with bells or headlines. It seeps, quietly, patiently, like the damp that never quite leaves the walls. In the 1890s, sexually transmitted infections are common enough to be expected and feared enough to shape behavior, but not understood well enough to be controlled. Syphilis, in particular, hangs over everything like a slow-moving curse. It doesn't strike all at once. It waits. First a sore that's easy to ignore. Then a rash that people pretend is something else. Years later, if you last that long, madness, paralysis, death. The timeline is vague, which somehow makes it worse. You never know if what you're feeling today is the beginning of the end or just another bad night. Doctors talk with confidence, though. That's the unsettling part. They debate stages and symptoms as if certainty alone can bend reality. Some insist the disease is hereditary. Others claim it's punishment for excess. A few quietly suspect it's contagious. But even they don't agree on how. Germ theory is gaining traction, but it hasn't won yet. Many physicians still don't wash their hands consistently. Needles are wiped, not sterilized. Instruments move from body to body with alarming efficiency. Historians still debate how many infections were spread not by clients, but by the very medical examinations meant to control them. You hear about the exams long before you experience one. Women talk about them in low voices, like discussing weather that can't be avoided. They're supposed to protect public health. What they mostly protect is the illusion that someone is in charge. You line up, you wait, you're inspected. There is little privacy and less dignity. Refusal isn't really an option. If you don't comply, you're marked as incooperative, which is a polite way of saying disposable. The city frames these measures as necessary. Necessary for whom, again, is never quite answered. Clients are rarely examined. When they are, it's voluntary, discreet, and gentle. You can't help noticing the difference. It's like airport security where only one group ever gets searched. And everyone pretends that's just common sense. You start to understand that disease here isn't just biological. It's social. Illness sticks to you longer because of who you are. A respectable woman who falls sick is unfortunate. A prostitute who falls sick is expected to. That expectation changes how quickly help arrives, how carefully it's given, and how long patience lasts. You learn to downplay symptoms, to work through pain, to pretend a fever is just the heat. Sometimes this works. Sometimes it buys you just enough time to make things worse. There's a strange irony in how much effort the city puts into monitoring women like you, while ignoring the larger ecosystem of infection. Sailors come and go. Soldiers pass through. Travelers arrive with souvenirs from other ports. No one tracks them. No one isolates them. The city is a crossroads. And crossroads are terrible places to pretend disease can be fenced in. Historians still debate whether officials truly believed containment was possible or whether they simply found it politically convenient to blame a small, visible group. You hear rumors about treatments. Mercury rubs, mercury pills, mercury injections, mercury everywhere. It's toxic, but toxicity is seen as proof that it's doing something. Pain becomes evidence of progress. Teeth loosen, gums bleed, skin breaks out. Doctors call this a sign that the medicine is working. You call it a nightmare you have to pay for. There's a bitter joke among women that if the disease doesn't kill you, The cure might finish the job. It's said lightly, but no one laughs too hard. One of the least discussed facts is how unpredictable outcomes are. Some women live with infection for years. Relatively stable. Others decline rapidly. There's no clear pattern, no reliable indicator. That uncertainty feeds superstition. People whisper about cursed houses, bad blood, divine judgment. It's easier than admitting that no one really knows what they're doing. You catch yourself wondering whether knowing more would help or just make the waiting worse. You notice how fear reshapes intimacy. Touch becomes cautious. Kisses are negotiated. Even kindness carries calculation. Every client is a gamble. And the odds are never in your favor. Condoms exist, yes, but they're fragile, expensive, and often rejected, suggesting one can cost you the transaction entirely. You weigh immediate survival against long-term risk. Again and again, until the calculation becomes automatic. Like breathing, like blinking. There's another quiet cruelty. Once you're known to be ill, your value drops. Clients disappear. Madams grow impatient. Doctors see you as a lost cause. The city's tolerance has limits. And sickness pushes you toward them faster than anything else. You start to see why women vanish so abruptly. They don't always die right away. Sometimes they're just pushed out of sight, where their decline won't inconvenience anyone. You pass a pharmacy window displaying bottles with elegant labels and terrifying contents. Laudanum for pain, tonics for nerves, promises for sale. It all looks reassuring from the outside. Clean glass, neat rows. Inside, the reality is messier. Addiction is common. Overdose is not rare. Relief comes with strings attached. And those strings tighten quietly. Historians still debate whether the fear surrounding venereal disease in this era actually worsened outcomes by driving women underground. Away from what little care existed. From where you're standing, it feels less like a debate and more like a foregone conclusion. Fear makes people hide. Hiding makes disease spread. The cycle feeds itself. As the night deepens, you feel a familiar ache settle in your joints. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's the heat. Maybe it's the beginning of something you don't want to name. You stretch, straighten your back, and keep moving. Stopping to worry won't change anything. That's another lesson the city teaches well. In 1890s New Orleans, disease isn't just a risk of the life you're living. It's the background condition of it. You don't choose the doctor so much as you're delivered to him. Like a package that's started to leak and needs inspection. The building smells of disinfectant and old wood. A combination that somehow makes both seem less trustworthy. Inside, the light is too bright for comfort. Reflecting off metal instruments laid out with pride. They look impressive. They look clean. They are neither. Doctors in the 1890s hold enormous authority. Especially over bodies like yours. They wear certainty the way they wear their coats, heavy, unquestioned, and rarely washed. When you sit down, no one asks how you feel. They ask what symptoms you're showing. As if you're a checklist rather than a person. Pain is expected. Fear is inconvenient. Consent is not part of the conversation. You hear the word treatment a lot. It sounds hopeful until you learn what it means. Injections that burn long after they're done. Salves that blister the skin. Internal procedures performed quickly, efficiently, and without anesthesia. The prevailing belief is that discomfort is necessary, even helpful. If it hurts, it must be working. That logic is everywhere. Like a bad proverb no one bothers to challenge. There's a strange theater to these visits. Doctors speak confidently, sometimes theatrically, explaining processes you don't fully understand in tones that suggest disagreement would be foolish. Medical journals of the era are filled with arguments, heated, contradictory arguments, about best practices. Yet in the exam room, all that uncertainty collapses into command. Lie still. Don't move. This won't take long. It always takes longer than they say. One of the least comforting facts, one that modern audiences rarely hear, is how frequently these treatments cause lasting harm. Mercury poisoning leads to tremors, memory loss, and organ failure. Repeated examinations increase infection risk. Instruments aren't sterilized in the way you'd recognize today, they're wiped, reused, trusted. Historians still debate whether the high mortality rate among prostitutes was driven more by disease progression or by aggressive, misinformed medical intervention. From your perspective, the distinction feels academic. You notice how differently men are treated when they show up. They're ushered into private rooms. Their discomfort is minimized. Their privacy is respected. Their diagnoses are framed as unfortunate but manageable. When it's your turn, the language shifts. There's judgment layered into the instructions. A subtle suggestion that your suffering is the natural outcome of your choices. It's hard not to internalize that, even when you know the system is stacked. There's also money. Always money. Treatments cost more than you expect and deliver less than you hope. Some doctors offer payment plans. Others don't bother. If you can't pay, you're advised to rest, abstain, pray, strategies that sound noble and do nothing. You leave poorer, weaker, and not particularly reassured. The city's idea of healthcare is less about healing and more about managing inconvenience. Women talk among themselves, quietly trading information like contraband. Which doctors are gentler? Which ones rush? Which ones believe strange theories about cold baths or electric shocks? Yes, electric shocks. They're new, exciting, and mostly useless. Which makes them fashionable. There's gallows humor in these conversations. Someone jokes that the future will look back and laugh at this era. Someone else replies that the future doesn't usually laugh at graves. You learn to prepare yourself mentally, to dissociate, to float somewhere above your body while things happen to it. This isn't weakness, it's adaptation. Modern people might call it coping. Here, it's survival. You count ceiling cracks. You recite songs in your head. You imagine being anywhere else, preferably somewhere with clean water and fewer opinions about your worth. Afterward, there's rarely guidance, no clear instructions, no follow-up care. Just vague advice and the unspoken understanding that if this doesn't work, something stronger will be tried next. Stronger is not better. Stronger just means more intense, more damaging, more final. You walk out into the street feeling oddly hollow, like something important has been misplaced inside you. Outside, the city goes on, music plays. Carriages roll, men laugh. No one can tell you've just been poked, scraped, injected, or judged. That invisibility is part of the problem. Suffering that doesn't disrupt commerce is easy to ignore. Historians still debate whether public indifference was born of ignorance or convenience. You suspect it was both. Shaking hands politely. There's a moment, standing there, when you consider not going back. Not to the doctor. Not to the district. Just walking until the city thins out and the road opens. Then reality taps you on the shoulder. You need money. You need shelter. You need food. Ideals don't pay rent. And freedom doesn't cure fever. So you straighten your clothes. Take a breath that smells faintly of river and medicine. And rejoin the flow. The doctor did his part. According to his rules. The city did its part. According to its logic. Now it's your turn again. In this world, healing isn't the goal. Compliance is. You start to notice how morality works here, not as a principle, but as a tool. It's pulled out when useful, put away when inconvenient, and always pointed in the same direction. Down, toward you. The laws that claim to protect public virtue feel strangely flexible, bending just enough to avoid inconveniencing the people who wrote them. On paper, the city condemns vice. In practice, it manages it. Ordinances are passed with solemn speeches about decency, then quietly enforced in ways that make sure business continues uninterrupted. You learn quickly that enforcement isn't about right and wrong. It's about optics. If things stay orderly, if respectable neighborhoods aren't bothered, if complaints don't reach the wrong ears, then morality can take the night off. You feel this most sharply in how punishment is distributed. Women are arrested for soliciting, for loitering, for being disorderly. These terms are elastic enough to stretch around almost any behavior. Men, meanwhile, are rarely charged. When they are, it's discreet, quick, and forgettable. A fine, a warning, a quiet favor called in. Historians still debate whether this imbalance was a conscious strategy to control women or simply an extension of a legal system that never considered them full participants. Either way, the outcome doesn't change. There's a peculiar performance to moral outrage. Reformers tour the district during the day, pointing at buildings like evidence exhibits. They speak of saving women, of restoring decency, of protecting society. At night, some of those same men return quietly, hats pulled low, money ready. The hypocrisy isn't hidden, it's just unremarkable. You realize that outrage here isn't about eliminating harm, it's about directing blame. You hear sermons that thunder about temptation and sin. The language is vivid, almost theatrical. Women are cautioned, warned, threatened. Men are advised. That difference matters. Advice assumes agency. Warnings assume guilt. You sit through these moments feeling oddly detached. Like you're watching a play where the script was written without consulting anyone on stage. One of the stranger facts, one that surfaces in city records if you read closely, is how often moral laws are invoked during periods of economic stress. When jobs disappear or crime rises, enforcement tightens, raids increase, arrests spike, it's easier to present action against women than to address structural problems. You become a symbol, a distraction, a convenient explanation. Historians still debate whether vice crackdowns were driven by genuine concern or political theater. The timing suggests theater, with better costumes. You learn to anticipate these shifts. A rumor spreads. A reform committee meets. Suddenly, the streets feel sharper. Police patrols increase. Madams become tense. Clients vanish for a few nights. Then, just as abruptly, everything relaxes again. The city exhales. Business resumes. The cycle repeats, predictable as the tides. There's a modern comparison that almost fits. Imagine being blamed for traffic while standing on the sidewalk. Cars speed past, engines roaring, but somehow you're the hazard. The solution, apparently, is to move you, not slow the cars. That's how morality works here. You're the visible problem, so you're the one adjusted. You start to see mercy as something performative. A woman might be given a chance if she looks repentant enough, young enough, salvageable enough. Mercy is selective, like a spotlight that never lands where it's most needed. Once you age, once you're sick, once you stop fitting the redemption narrative, the light moves on. You remain unseen. The laws themselves are written in careful language, full of words like public order and community standards. They sound neutral. They are not. They assume a community you are not part of, standards you were never invited to help set. When those standards are enforced, they feel less like guidance and more like gravity, always pulling you down, never lifting you up. You overhear a policeman joke that the city would fall apart without women like you. It's said lightly, almost kindly. There's a strange honesty in it. You are necessary, but never respectable. Essential, but never protected. It's like being the foundation of a building no one wants to acknowledge exists. If it cracks, the structure trembles, but no one comes down to thank the concrete. As the night wears on, you feel the weight of this selective morality settle in, not heavy enough to crush you outright, just heavy enough to keep you tired. Tired people don't rebel, they adapt, they survive, they stop expecting fairness. You realize that might be the system's greatest success, not the laws themselves, but how thoroughly they teach you what not to ask for. You keep moving, because standing still under a moral spotlight is dangerous. And because now you understand something essential. In this city, virtue isn't about behavior. It's about who gets forgiven for it. The city doesn't announce changes loudly. It prefers paperwork, meetings, and phrases that sound reassuring if you don't look too closely. You hear about it first as a rumor, passed between women while adjusting gloves or fixing hair in a mirror that's seen too much. There's talk of a plan, a district, a place where everything will be contained, regulated, and safer. The words float like perfume, pleasant, promising, and designed to distract. This is how Storyville begins. Not with a grand opening, but with an ordinance. Alderman Sidney Story proposes a solution that sounds almost modern. If prostitution is going to exist anyway, why not confine it to a specific area? Keep it away from churches, schools, and respectable homes. Out of sight, out of mind. The city nods. It likes solutions that don't require men to change their habits. Historians still debate whether Story believed he was protecting women or simply protecting the city's image. His name, conveniently, survives either way. From your perspective, the idea lands with mixed weight. On one hand, there's a promise of stability. No more guessing which streets are safe tonight. No more sudden raids in neighborhoods that decide they've had enough of you. On the other hand, being officially contained feels uncomfortably close to being officially sacrificed. You're not being integrated, you're being organized. When the district takes shape, it's precise. Streets are mapped, boundaries drawn, brothels licensed. The city produces documents listing houses, madams, and prices, all under the guise of transparency. It feels almost respectable, which should worry you more than it does. Respectability has a way of smoothing over cruelty until it looks like order. Storyville quickly becomes famous. Men arrive with guidebooks, some printed openly, others passed discreetly from hand to hand. These guides list women like attractions, hair color, nationality, specialty, reducing lives to bullet points. It's efficient. It's dehumanizing. It also makes the district profitable enough that no one questions the cost. You realize with a sinking feeling that once something becomes profitable, arguments about morality tend to lose their urgency. Walking into Storyville for the first time feels like crossing an invisible border. The atmosphere shifts. Music spills more freely. Laughter sounds louder, almost defiant. Gas lamps glow brighter. On the surface, it feels safer. There are rules now, schedules, inspections, predictability. For a moment, you allow yourself to believe the promise that this might be better than the chaos that came before. But containment has consequences. By concentrating prostitution in one area, the city concentrates disease, violence, and desperation right along with it. Clients move from house to house with ease. Infections spread faster. Competition intensifies. The district becomes a pressure cooker. And you are inside it. Historians still debate whether officials anticipated this effect or simply ignored it. Either way, no one hits the brakes. There's also a psychological shift. Outside the district, you were a problem people tried not to see. Inside it, you are the point. Men arrive expecting indulgence without consequences. The boundaries create permission. What happens in Storyville, they believe, stays in Storyville. That belief emboldens behavior. You notice it immediately. In hands that linger too long. In refusals taken less seriously. In the assumption that money purchases not just access, but silence. The city increases medical inspections to match the new order. On paper, this looks responsible. In practice, it means more frequent examinations, more exposure to unsafe procedures, more opportunities for infection through instruments meant to prevent it. The irony would be funny if it weren't happening to your body. You begin to understand that regulation without understanding can be more dangerous than neglect. Storyville also creates winners. Madams who secure prime locations grow wealthy. Musicians find steady work. Taxi drivers and bartenders thrive. The district hums with economic life. You watch this prosperity bloom around you like a garden planted in poisoned soil. It's hard not to feel the imbalance. Everyone is earning from this place. You're just enduring it. There's a subtle shift in how the city talks about you now. You're no longer simply immoral. You're regulated, managed, accounted for. That bureaucratic language makes it easier to look away. Problems that fit neatly into forms don't inspire urgency. They inspire filing cabinets. Historians still debate whether Storyville represented progress compared to earlier eras. From where you stand, it feels like a cleaner cage. You adapt, because adaptation is what you do. You learn which houses draw the worst clients, which nights are safer, which madams actually intervene when things go wrong. You learn to read men faster, to sense danger in posture and tone. These skills feel sharp, honed. You wish you didn't need them. As the district settles into routine, you feel the city relax. Complaints drop. Respectable neighborhoods breathe easier. Reformers redirect their energy elsewhere. Storyville has done its job. The city's conscience feels lighter, outsourced to a grid of streets where consequences are contained along with the people who bear them. You stand under a lamp one evening, listening to music drift through open windows, and realize something chilling. By giving this place a name and borders, the city hasn't made your life safer. It's made your death easier to ignore. Once you're inside Storyville long enough, the novelty wears off. The lights that seemed welcoming on the first night become harsh, almost interrogative. Music spills constantly, pianos, horns, voices drifting into each other until nothing quite ends cleanly. It's beautiful in a way, but also relentless. Silence would invite thought, and thought here is dangerous. Life inside the district runs on routines disguised as pleasure. You wake late because nights stretch long. You dress carefully, not for vanity, but strategy. Colors matter. Fabrics matter. Even how tired you look matters. Every detail becomes part of a calculation about who will choose you, how long they'll stay, and how much risk you can absorb today. Modern people like to talk about branding. You're doing it before the word exists, with far higher stakes. From the outside, the houses look festive, painted trim, balconies strung with lights, laughter spilling onto the street. Inside, the atmosphere tightens. Women sit together between clients, sharing powder and quiet jokes. Humor here is a pressure valve. Someone comments that the piano has been playing the same tune since Tuesday. Someone else says maybe it's trying to hypnotize the customers into tipping better. You smile, because smiling costs less energy than despair. There's a strange intimacy among women that forms quickly and fades just as fast. You know each other's faces, habits, small tells. You also know not to get too attached. People disappear here with alarming efficiency. A woman might be sent away to rest. Another might leave with a man and never come back. When someone's bed is suddenly empty, explanations are offered casually, like weather reports. You learn to nod and move on. Clients treat the district like a theme park for adulthood. They arrive expecting fantasy and convenience, not consequences. The guidebooks promise variety and discretion, and men believe them. You notice how the boundaries change behavior. Outside Storyville, men might hesitate. Inside, hesitation feels unnecessary. The rules seem suspended. You realize that containment hasn't reduced demand, it's intensified it. One of the least romantic truths is how quickly competition erodes solidarity. Houses compare earnings. Madams compare reputations. Women compare youth, beauty, novelty. There's no room for collective bargaining when everyone is replaceable. The district runs on abundance, the abundance of women willing or forced to work, the abundance of men willing to pay, the abundance of silence when things go wrong. Historians still debate whether Storyville fostered community or fractured it. From your vantage point, it does both, unevenly. Violence exists here, but it's quiet. It hides behind closed doors and polite excuses. Bruises are explained away as accidents. Rough clients are warned, not banned. Calling the police is possible in theory, but risky in practice. Attention can shut a house down. Madams balance safety against profit with a precision that feels almost mathematical. You learn which doors lock securely and which don't. That knowledge becomes more valuable than any piece of jewelry. Health inspections become part of the rhythm. You line up, you wait, you submit. The process is faster now. Less personal. More mechanical. Efficiency replaces concern. You joke that you should get a punch card, 10 inspections. 1 free infection. The joke lands softly. No one laughs too loud. The inspections don't make you safer. But they make the city feel responsible. Which seems to be the actual goal. There are moments of genuine beauty that catch you off guard. A song played just right. A laugh that feels real. A client who treats you like a person and not a transaction. These moments are dangerous because they create contrast. They make the rest harder to bear. You learn to enjoy them briefly and let them go. Holding on too tightly is another kind of risk. Children run errands through the district during the day. Eyes trained to look nowhere in particular. They learn quickly what not to ask. You wonder what stories they'll tell later. If they tell any at all. Storyville educates everyone it touches. Just not in ways that look good on paper. As weeks turn into months, you feel the district shaping you. Your instincts sharpen. Your patience thins. Your sense of time warps. Nights blur together. You stop marking days and start marking changes, new faces. Missing faces. Houses that close and reopen under new names. The city calls this stability. Historians still debate whether life inside Storyville was safer than life outside it. Statistics argue both sides, but statistics don't capture the constant vigilance. The way your body never fully relaxes. Safety here isn't the absence of danger. It's the management of it. You stand at a window one night, watching men drift down the street. Music trailing after them like smoke. From here, the district looks alive, vibrant, almost joyful. You know better. You know that behind every glowing window is a careful balance of fear and performance. And you know that once you're inside Storyville, leaving isn't as simple as stepping back across the line. The district remembers you. You start to understand that every system needs a face. Someone to make it feel human. In Storyville, that face often belongs to the madam. She's usually older than you. Dressed impeccably. Posture sharp as a ruler. She knows everyone's name, everyone's weakness, everyone's earning potential. When she smiles, it's measured. When she frowns, the room adjusts itself. Madams are spoken about with a strange mix of fear and admiration. Some women swear by them. Others swear at them. Both are usually right. A good madam can be a shield, intervening when a client crosses a line. Smoothing things over with police. Arranging a doctor who doesn't rush or shout. A bad one can be worse than no protection at all. Because she understands exactly how much pressure you can take before you break. Power in Storyville isn't loud. It's administrative. The madam controls rooms, schedules, introductions. She decides who works which nights. Who gets the better clients. Who's allowed to rest. These decisions are framed as practical. Never personal. But you quickly learn that practicality has favorites. Youth is rewarded. Novelty is prized. Illness is inconvenient. Loyalty helps. But only up to the point where it interferes with profit. There's a myth, one repeated often enough to sound true, that madams were former workers who made it. Some were. Others married money, inherited houses, or simply arrived early enough to stake a claim. The rags to riches narrative is comforting. It suggests upward mobility. It implies that endurance will eventually pay off. Historians still debate how common these success stories really were. From what you can see, They're the exception that keeps everyone else hoping. You notice how madams speak the language of care fluently. They remind you to eat. They insist you rest when you look pale. They scold you gently for working too much. At the same time, they keep meticulous books tracking exactly how much you earn, how much you owe, how much you cost. Care and calculation sit side by side, neither canceling the other out. It's unsettling, like being hugged by someone counting your ribs. When trouble arises, the madam becomes a negotiator. A client complains, a neighbor grumbles, a policeman lingers too long. She handles it with practiced calm. Money changes hands. Promises are made. Problems dissolve. You realize that what she's really selling isn't sex, it's discretion. And discretion, in this city, is worth more than morality. But her protection has limits. If you're injured badly enough to stop working, patience thins. If you attract too much attention, tolerance fades. If you become sick in a way that can't be hidden, you're suddenly a liability. The tone shifts. Conversations shorten. Suggestions are made about taking time away. Historians still debate whether madams saw themselves as caretakers or entrepreneurs first. The answer, you suspect, depended on the balance sheet that month. There's also rivalry. Houses compete. Madams gossip. Reputations are built and undermined with whispers. One bad rumor can empty rooms for weeks. You learn to be careful not just with clients, but with words. Silence becomes another form of currency. The district runs on it. You observe how madams cultivate relationships with officials. Dinners, gifts, polite familiarity. These connections keep inspections predictable and raids rare. It's impressive. In a cold way, the city pretends to regulate Storyville. But in practice, women like you are managed by a small circle of powerful intermediaries. Democracy doesn't reach this far. There's a moment when you almost admire her. The madam, standing at the top of the stairs, surveying her domain like a general. She's survived in a world that eats women alive. That counts for something. Then you remember the women who didn't survive, whose names never made it into ledgers because they stopped being profitable. Admiration curdles into something more complicated. She calls you by name one evening, asks how you're feeling. You tell her you're fine, because that's the correct answer. She nods, already thinking ahead. Tomorrow's bookings, next week's repairs, the endless logistics of pleasure. You realize that in her world, empathy is efficient only when it aligns with business. As you climb the stairs to your room, you feel the strange duality settle in. The madam can protect you from certain men, certain nights, certain dangers. She cannot protect you from the system that made her powerful in the first place. Historians still debate whether Storyville empowered women through figures like her or simply created a hierarchy where a few survived at the expense of many. You lie back on the bed, listening to the muffled music below. The house hums with activity, orderly and alive. For a moment, it almost feels secure. Then you remember, power here is borrowed. And borrowed things can be taken back. Violence in Storyville rarely announces itself. It doesn't crash through doors with dramatic timing or leave neat evidence behind. It seeps in quietly, dressed as impatience, entitlement, or a misunderstanding no one bothers to clarify. By the time it's unmistakable, it's already happened. You learn to recognize the warning signs quickly. A man who drinks too fast. One who won't meet your eyes, or won't stop meeting them. Hands that test boundaries early. Like they're checking the strength of a fence. You adjust your tone, your posture, your words. De-escalation becomes an instinct. You are constantly negotiating, even when no one has formally opened negotiations. Behind closed doors, the rules blur. Money changes the meaning of consent in ways the law refuses to examine. If you resist too firmly, you risk retaliation. If you don't resist at all, you risk yourself. There's no winning strategy, just damage control. Modern people like to ask why women didn't report abuse. Standing here, the question feels almost naive. Report to whom? For what outcome? When violence does occur, it's often minimized immediately. Bruises are rough play. Screams are enthusiasm. Blood is an accident. Language smooths the edges until nothing sharp remains. Madams prefer explanations that don't disrupt business. Doctors note injuries without asking how they happened. Police accept whatever story keeps the paperwork light. Historians still debate how much violence went unrecorded versus deliberately erased. You suspect the numbers lean heavily toward erased. There's a particular kind of cruelty in how rare accountability is. A client who hurts you might be quietly warned. He might be asked not to return, for a while. But bans are temporary. Memory is short, and money forgives quickly. You learn which men to avoid. But avoidance has limits. Sometimes they choose you, and the choice overrides preference. Women talk to each other afterward in fragments. Be careful with him. Don't go upstairs alone. Lock the door fast. Advice replaces justice. Survival strategies stand in for consequences. There's a strange solidarity in this exchange, practical, unsentimental, urgent. No one asks for details. Details don't help. One unsettling truth becomes clear. Violence isn't a glitch in Storyville's system. It's absorbed into it. The district keeps functioning because harm is managed privately, quietly, and efficiently. Public scandal is the real threat. Pain that stays indoors doesn't count. Historians still debate whether containment reduced citywide crime. From inside the rooms, it feels like crime was simply reassigned. You notice how your body changes. Not dramatically, subtly. You flinch less when you should flinch more. You stop registering certain kinds of discomfort. You learn how to go somewhere else in your head when you need to. Dissociation isn't taught, but it's learned quickly. It's efficient. It's terrifying. It works. There are nights when nothing happens. And those are almost worse. The waiting stretches nerves thin. You sit, listening for footsteps, for voices, for the particular sound of a door opening too decisively. Safety here is never confirmed. It's only postponed. You realize that relaxation itself feels dangerous. Like taking your hand off a railing. Occasionally, a case breaks through the surface. A woman badly injured. A death that can't be explained away easily. Newspapers might mention it briefly. Framed as tragedy or misfortune. Rarely as crime. Rarely with names. The story fades quickly. The district keeps humming. Historians still debate whether these moments prompted meaningful change. You don't see much evidence of it. There's a dark joke that circulates among the women. The walls hear everything. But they never testify. It's funny in the way only desperate humor can be. The rooms are thick with secrets. Layered over years like wallpaper. You imagine peeling them back, revealing stains no one wants to acknowledge. You find yourself becoming an expert in reading silence. A quiet hallway can mean peace, or something much worse. You learn to listen for patterns. Which nights are loud? Which nights feel wrong? Instinct becomes data. Data becomes survival. And yet, despite everything, the city continues to sell Storyville as controlled, civilized, even safe compared to what came before. The phrase, less violent, gets used a lot. You wonder what baseline they're measuring against. You wonder whose bodies were used to set it. As dawn approaches, you sit on the edge of the bed, skin aching, mind buzzing. Another night survived. That's how success is measured here, not by thriving, not by justice, just by continuing. In Storyville, violence doesn't need to be spectacular. It just needs to be tolerated. By now, you've noticed the pattern. When something goes wrong, the police are always nearby, and somehow never quite involved. Their presence in Storyville is constant, almost decorative. They stroll the streets, chat with madams, accept nods and small courtesies. Order is maintained, technically, just not the kind that protects you. The relationship between Storyville and the police is built on mutual understanding. Officers know which houses are licensed, which ones pay on time, which madams prefer cash and which prefer favors. In return, brothels enjoy predictability. Raids are rare and usually announced in advance through whispers that travel faster than official notices. This isn't corruption in the dramatic sense. It's administrative comfort. Everyone knows their role. You learn quickly what the police are for, and what they are not. They are there to keep the peace outside, to ensure noise doesn't spill into respectable neighborhoods, to prevent fights between clients that might draw attention. They are not there to arbitrate what happens behind closed doors. That space is considered private, transactional, already settled by the exchange of money. Once again, morality dissolves into logistics. If a woman does approach an officer after an incident, the interaction follows a script you could recite by heart. Questions are asked slowly, skeptically. Details are probed in ways that feel less like investigation and more like cross-examination. What time was it? Had you been drinking? Did you provoke him? Each question nudges responsibility back toward you. Many women don't bother finishing the story. Walking away feels less humiliating than staying. There's an unspoken hierarchy even in enforcement. A wealthy client's complaint carries weight. A madam's concern might prompt action. A working woman's injury is an inconvenience. Historians still debate whether police indifference was a result of limited resources or deliberate policy. From where you stand, the distinction feels theoretical. Either way, the outcome is the same: protection flows upward. You start to recognize certain officers by name. They recognize you, too, not as an individual, but as a category. Their tone is familiar, almost friendly, until it isn't. They joke, they warn, they remind you of curfews that shift depending on mood and pressure. Sometimes they enforce rules strictly, just to remind everyone they can. Authority, like everything else here, is flexible. There's a strange comfort in predictability. Even when it's unfair, you know which streets are watched closely, which corners are ignored, which nights are safer to move around and which are better spent staying inside. This knowledge becomes part of your mental map, as essential as knowing where the stairs creak or which locks stick. Safety is never guaranteed, but it can be approximated. Occasionally, the police act decisively. A man becomes too violent, too loud, too visible. An arrest is made. The papers might mention it. For a brief moment, it feels like accountability. Then you learn the details. The charges are reduced. The sentence is light. The man returns weeks later, perhaps to a different house. The system has corrected for disruption, not harm. You overhear an officer say that Storyville is safer because it's watched. You almost agree. Watched things behave differently, but being watched is not the same as being protected. Surveillance doesn't stop damage, it just makes sure damage stays contained. Historians still debate whether police oversight reduced crime overall. Inside the district, it feels more like harm has been efficiently routed away from public view. There's a bitter kind of humor in how often the police are present when nothing is wrong and absent when something is. Someone jokes that trouble has a schedule and officers don't work those hours. The joke lands softly. Like most truths here, you smile because it's easier than explaining why it hurts. You realize that the police function as part of the district's infrastructure. Like gas lamps or cobblestones. They keep things running smoothly enough that outsiders feel reassured. Their authority gives the illusion of safety without the inconvenience of intervention. It's a delicate balance, and you are not the priority it's designed around. As you walk past them one evening, you catch your reflection in a shop window, posture practiced, expression neutral. You look like someone who knows the rules. That knowledge keeps you alive. It does not keep you safe. In Storyville, the police aren't silent because they don't see what's happening. They're silent because seeing it is part of the job. Race is the line no one needs to draw on a map. Because everyone already knows where it runs. You feel it the moment you pay attention, not as a single rule, but as 1,000 small differences stacked neatly on top of each other. Same streets, same work, entirely different outcomes. In Storyville, segregation isn't just social, it's economic, medical, and lethal. Brothels are categorized by race, as if human beings were flavors on a menu. Guidebooks list it plainly, without shame. Clients choose accordingly. The city pretends this is preference, not policy. Historians still debate whether racial segregation in the district was driven by demand or enforced by law. From where you're standing, the distinction feels hollow. Either way, the walls go up. If you're a white woman, the city frames you as a problem to be managed. If you're a woman of color, especially black, you're framed as a problem to be endured or eliminated. Inspections are harsher. Medical treatment is rougher. Patience is shorter. Protection, already thin, nearly disappears. You see it in the way doctors speak more abruptly, in the way police linger less, in the way complaints evaporate entirely. The medical system is where the difference cuts deepest. White women are examined too, humiliated too, harmed too, but black women are far more likely to be treated as experimental. Procedures are rushed, pain is ignored, assumptions replace questions. There's a widespread belief, deeply embedded and wildly incorrect, that black women feel less pain. That belief shapes everything. Historians still debate how much racial pseudoscience influenced treatment decisions versus how much it simply justified cruelty that was already convenient. You notice the outcomes. Illness progresses faster. Death comes sooner. Disappearances are more common. When a white woman vanishes, people whisper. When a black woman does, the city barely registers the absence. Records are sparse. Names are misspelled or missing. Lives blur into statistics, if they appear at all. Housing within the district reflects the same hierarchy. Nicer houses cluster together, drawing wealthier clients and better music. Poorer houses sit closer to industrial edges. Louder, dirtier, easier to ignore. Women of color are pushed toward these margins, both physically and socially. It's containment within containment, a narrowing spiral of options. You hear white reformers speak passionately about saving fallen women. The language rarely includes women who look like you, or who don't look like them. Charity is selective. Redemption is curated. Historians still debate whether reform movements intentionally excluded women of color or simply mirrored the prejudices of their time. From your perspective, the result is indistinguishable from intent. There's another uncomfortable truth. Competition across racial lines is discouraged, sometimes violently. Keeping groups separate reduces solidarity. It prevents collective resistance. You see how this benefits everyone in power. Divided people negotiate poorly. United people ask questions. Storyville is very good at preventing questions. Music crosses these lines more easily than people do. Jazz drifts out of black neighborhoods, rich and inventive, then gets repackaged and celebrated elsewhere. The city loves the sound but avoids the source. You notice how often black musicians are praised while black women are blamed. Creativity is welcomed. Humanity is conditional. Violence, too, follows racial contours. A white woman harmed might prompt quiet concern. A black woman harmed is assumed to have brought it on herself. Reporting feels pointless. Silence becomes habit. Historians still debate whether racial bias increased overall mortality in the district. Standing here, watching who survives and who doesn't, the answer feels obvious. You catch yourself adjusting behavior depending on who's watching, which house you're near, which officer is on duty, which doctor's name is on the door. This constant recalibration is exhausting. It's also necessary. Race in Storyville isn't just identity, it's risk assessment. As night settles, you walk past a group of women laughing together, their voices briefly lifting above the district's hum. For a moment, differences blur. Then a client approaches, eyes already sorting, categorizing. The moment breaks. Everyone returns to their assigned places. You understand now that Storyville doesn't just sell sex. It sells hierarchy, and race sets the price. Children are everywhere in Storyville, which feels wrong until you realize how much effort the city puts into pretending they aren't. They appear in daylight mostly, slipping through streets that look almost ordinary before night resets them, running errands, carrying baskets, delivering notes folded too carefully to be accidental. They move fast, eyes trained forward, learning early which questions not to ask. You notice them first because they notice everything. Children in this district develop a particular kind of awareness, quiet, alert, adaptive. They know which doors are safe to knock on and which aren't. They know when to cross the street without being told. They know how to make themselves small when grown-ups are busy pretending nothing unusual is happening. No one teaches them this directly. Storyville teaches them by example. Some of these children live nearby. Others are sent in deliberately. Because familiarity breeds silence. A child who grows up among gas lamps and piano music learns not to comment on what adults do at night. It becomes background noise, like the river or the heat. Historians still debate how many children were directly involved in the district's economy versus merely adjacent to it. From what you can see, the boundary is thin and frequently crossed. You pass a girl who can't be more than 10, maybe 11, waiting outside a house with practiced patience. She's holding a parcel. She doesn't fidget. She doesn't stare. She looks like someone who's been waiting her whole life. You wonder what she thinks happens upstairs. You wonder what she's already learned not to wonder. There's an unspoken rule about children. Acknowledge them as little as possible. Not because people want to protect them, but because acknowledgement invites responsibility. If you don't look too closely, you don't have to act. The city excels at this kind of selective blindness. Children become part of the scenery, present, necessary, unaccounted for. Some women have children of their own. This fact is rarely mentioned out loud. But it shapes everything. Mothers work longer hours. They tolerate worse conditions. They save coins obsessively, hiding them in hems and floorboards. A child becomes both motivation and leverage. Madams know this. So do clients. Historians still debate whether motherhood increased women's vulnerability in Storyville or gave them reason to endure. You suspect it did both. Relentlessly. The children learn quickly which adults are kind, which ones might sneak them bread, which ones should be avoided. Kindness here is practical, not sentimental. A smile exchanged quietly, a coin pressed into a palm, a warning murmured in passing. No speeches, no rescue fantasies, just survival scaled down to size. You overhear adults joking that kids in Storyville grow up faster. It's said with a shrug, as if speed were impressive rather than alarming. Childhood here is compressed. Innocence isn't shattered so much as quietly skipped over. Like a chapter no one has time to read. The district doesn't corrupt children dramatically. It simply doesn't pause for them. Education is inconsistent at best. Some attend school sporadically. Others work full-time by an age that feels uncomfortable even to think about. The city counts this as normal. After all, many families are poor. Labor is expected. Historians still debate whether children in districts like Storyville experienced worse outcomes than those in other impoverished neighborhoods. From your vantage point, the difference is exposure. These children see too much too soon. And there's no way to unsee it. You watch a boy deliver messages between houses. Moving with confidence born of repetition. He knows which madam prefers urgency and which prefers politeness. He knows which notes are dangerous to drop. This is skill. It's also training. You wonder what kind of man he'll become, having learned so early that adults lie professionally. There's a particular sadness in how normalized it all feels. The children don't act shocked. They don't act afraid. They act efficient. Fear, when constant, stops being dramatic. It becomes a low-level hum, shaping decisions quietly. You recognize the feeling. It's the same one you live with every day. Occasionally, a reformer notices the children. Photographs are taken, articles are written, outrage flares briefly, then attention shifts. Children are hard to rescue without addressing everything around them, and addressing everything around them would inconvenience too many adults. Historians still debate whether child welfare concerns meaningfully influenced policy decisions about Storyville. The district survives long enough to answer that question for itself. You catch yourself imagining what it would be like to grow up somewhere else. Somewhere quieter, somewhere with clearer rules. The thought feels almost indulgent. Here, imagination is a luxury item. Most people can't afford it. As evening approaches, the children thin out. They know when to disappear. Night belongs to adults. Officially. Unofficially, the impact lingers. The district doesn't reset just because smaller feet stop running through it. The lessons learned during the day don't evaporate after sunset. You watch the last of them vanish down a side street, swallowed by the city's folds. For a moment, the absence feels louder than the music. You realize that Storyville isn't just shaping the present, it's rehearsing the future. These children are learning how power works, how silence works, how bodies are valued and discarded. They're learning it early. And like everything else in this place, the cost will be paid later. Quietly, by people the city won't bother to count. Religion never really leaves you alone in New Orleans. It lingers in the background like humidity, sometimes comforting, sometimes suffocating, always present. Church bells mark time just as reliably as the piano down the street. And both claim to offer something like salvation. The difference is that one of them charges up front. You hear sermons through open windows during the day. Voices rising and falling with practiced conviction. Sin is named clearly. Redemption is promised generously. The language is soothing, almost musical, until you realize who it's aimed at. Women like you are cautioned, warned, urged to repent. Men are reminded to resist temptation. That distinction lands heavily. One group is blamed for existing. The other is praised for trying not to participate too enthusiastically. Churches offer help, sometimes, soup kitchens, temporary shelter, moral guidance. The help comes with conditions, though they're rarely written down. Confession must be public enough to satisfy observers. Change must be visible enough to reassure donors. Relapse is treated as failure rather than evidence of how hard escape actually is. Historians still debate whether religious charities genuinely aimed to help women leave prostitution or primarily sought to reaffirm social order. From where you stand, both seem true in unequal measure. You attend a service once. Out of curiosity or desperation, you're not sure which. The pew is hard. The air smells faintly of wax and old wood. The preacher speaks passionately about forgiveness, about how no one is beyond saving. You almost believe him, until you notice the glances, the careful distance, the way people sit just a little farther away. Forgiveness, it seems, is easier to preach than to practice. There's a strange hypocrisy in how religion interacts with Storyville. Churches condemn it loudly, yet rely on the city's tolerance to keep it contained. Some clergy even benefit indirectly, renting property, accepting donations that trace back, quietly, to the district's profits. This isn't scandalous. It's ordinary. Historians still debate how widespread this quiet complicity was. You suspect it was common enough not to be surprising. You hear men quote scripture before stepping into brothels, as if invoking forgiveness in advance. You hear women pray afterward, hoping the same words apply. Religion here becomes less about transformation and more about timing. Sin, confession, Repeat. The cycle mirrors the district's own rhythms uncomfortably well. For some women, faith becomes an anchor, not the institutional kind, the private kind. Quiet prayers murmured before opening a door. Small rituals repeated for luck. Belief shrinks down to something portable. Something no one can tax or regulate. You understand the appeal. When everything else is negotiated, belief feels like the one space not yet claimed. Others reject religion entirely, tired of being cast as cautionary tales. You hear bitterness in their voices, sharpened by years of sermons that never quite included compassion. They joke that hell must be crowded if it's reserved for women like them. The joke lands, soft but sharp. Humor, once again, does the work theology won't. Reform movements often wear religious clothing. They march with banners. They sing hymns. They speak earnestly about rescue. Sometimes they succeed in pulling a woman out, briefly. But rescue without support collapses easily. Jobs are scarce. Stigma follows. A woman who returns to Storyville after a failed attempt carries an extra layer of shame. Like a scar everyone can see. Historians still debate whether reform efforts reduced harm or simply reshuffled it. The outcomes look uneven at best. You notice how often religion frames suffering as instructive. Pain teaches humility. Hardship builds character. These ideas sound noble until you realize who's expected to learn the lesson. Suffering becomes meaningful only when it belongs to someone with no power to refuse it. You wonder what lesson the city thinks it's teaching you. Endurance, perhaps, silence, acceptance. At night, church bells sometimes ring alongside music from the district, overlapping in a way that feels almost ironic. Salvation and indulgence share the same air. You walk beneath both sounds, belonging fully to neither. It's a strange limbo, condemned by one world, exploited by the other. You begin to understand that religion in this city doesn't exist outside the system you're trapped in. It's woven through it, sometimes softening edges, sometimes sharpening them. It offers hope selectively and judgment generously. Like everything else here, it asks more of you than it gives back. As you move on, the bells fade behind you, replaced by laughter and music once more. The city shifts its tone easily. You're left carrying the echo of words about forgiveness that never quite seem meant for you. In Storyville, salvation is always discussed. Escape is rarely planned. Music finds you whether you want it to or not. In Storyville, it leaks through walls, slides under doors, drifts down the street like warm breath. You hear it before you see it, piano chords looping patiently. A cornet crying a little. A rhythm that feels improvised because it is. The sound doesn't ask permission. It just arrives, offering itself as relief. For a moment, music feels like mercy. It fills the air where words would only bruise. When the band hits the right groove, your shoulders loosen without your consent. You notice how everyone pauses for half a second, even the men who pretend not to care. Music does that. It interrupts the script. It creates a pocket where the night briefly belongs to no one. You learn quickly that musicians occupy a strange position here. They're not clients, not quite workers like you. Not fully respectable either. They move between rooms, between classes, between moods. A good player can smooth a rough night. A bad one can sharpen it. Madams understand this and pay accordingly. Music is infrastructure in Storyville. as essential as locks and lights. Jazz, though it doesn't yet call itself that, thrives on the edges of the district. Black musicians experiment, borrow, bend notes until something new takes shape. The sound is restless, inventive, alive. You feel it in your chest more than your ears. Historians still debate exactly where jazz was born. But standing here, it's hard not to think of it as a response to pressure. When words are dangerous, sound becomes safer. There's a particular irony in how freely music travels compared to people. A tune born in a black neighborhood might end up played in a white brothel, then written down elsewhere under someone else's name. The city celebrates the sound while keeping its creators boxed in. You notice this pattern everywhere: beauty extracted, context discarded, music survives, musicians struggle. For you, music becomes a kind of escape that doesn't require leaving. While it plays, you can imagine yourself elsewhere. Somewhere cooler, somewhere quieter, somewhere with fewer expectations pressed against your skin. The illusion lasts only as long as the song. But sometimes that's enough. You take relief where you can get it. There are nights when the music feels almost conspiratorial. As if it's whispering, "You're still here." Survival becomes rhythm, one night into the next, one song into the next. You start measuring time not by clocks, but by sets. When the band switches tunes, the night has turned. When they pack up, dawn isn't far behind. Musicians see more than most. They watch the rooms while pretending not to. They hear things through walls. Some of them offer kindness in small doses: a shared cigarette, a joke, a warning about a client who's had too much to drink. It's not heroism, it's mutual recognition. You're all working inside the same machine. There's a modern comparison that almost fits. Music here functions like a buffering screen. While it plays, reality loads more slowly. Pain doesn't disappear, but it softens around the edges. You joke that the piano should get hazard pay. Someone else says it already does, just not in money. Historians still debate whether music in Storyville genuinely improved conditions for women or simply made exploitation more palatable. From your point of view, it does both. It soothes, it distracts, it helps the night pass. It also keeps the rooms full and the men relaxed. Relief and complicity share the same melody. You find yourself attached to certain songs, not because they're particularly good, but because they mark moments you survived. That slow number played the night you were sick but needed the money. That upbeat tune from the evening nothing went wrong, which feels rarer than it should. Music becomes memory, whether you want it to or not. As the night deepens, the sound grows looser, more experimental. Musicians chase ideas that don't quite exist yet. The city doesn't know it, but something important is happening in these rooms. A future is being rehearsed quietly. Between drinks and deals, you wonder who will get credit for it later. When the last notes fade and chairs scrape back, the room feels suddenly exposed. Music has been holding something up, and now it's gone. You feel the weight return, of bodies, of expectations, of risk. The illusion collapses gently, like a curtain falling. Still, as you move on, the melody lingers. It hums under your thoughts. A private soundtrack no one can take away. In a place designed to consume you, music offers a small rebellion. Not freedom, but breath. The inspections start to feel routine long before they stop feeling invasive. That's the trick of repetition. It dulls the sharpest edges just enough for the system to keep moving. You're told this is progress, oversight, responsibility. Words that sound reassuring if you don't examine how they land on your body. You line up with other women in a narrow hallway that smells faintly of disinfectant and sweat. The floor is scuffed smooth by years of nervous feet. No one talks much. There's no point. You already know what's coming. And knowing doesn't make it easier. When the door opens, you step forward because stepping back would cause more trouble than compliance ever will. The exam is quick, impersonal, and humiliating in ways that are difficult to describe without resorting to shouting. No one asks how you're feeling. No one explains what they're doing. Instruments appear and disappear. Notes are made. Stamps are applied. You are cleared or you are not. The process treats your body like paperwork, something to be checked for errors and returned to circulation as fast as possible. What's rarely mentioned is how ineffective these inspections actually are. Many infections don't show symptoms right away. Others are missed entirely. Some are misdiagnosed. The tools are crude, the knowledge incomplete. Yet the city clings to these rituals because they produce documents. And documents produce comfort. Historians still debate whether mandatory examinations reduced the spread of disease or merely created the illusion of control. Standing here, the illusion feels heavier than the truth. There's a particular cruelty in how compliance is framed as responsibility. If you fall ill, the implication is that you must have failed to follow instructions. If an inspection misses something, that failure is quietly absorbed by the system. Blame doesn't travel upward, it settles back onto you. Like dust. The inspections also become a tool of discipline. Miss one, and you're flagged. Question one, and you're noted. Too many notes. And doors start closing. Madams grow tense. Clients are redirected. You feel the pressure tighten, not overtly, but unmistakably. Health policy doubles as social control. And you're the subject of the experiment. Some doctors take their roles seriously, trying to be gentle within the limits they're given. Others rush, bored, impatient. A few seem to enjoy the authority too much. You learn to read faces quickly, to brace or relax accordingly. This is a skill you never wanted, now indispensable. Historians still debate whether abuse during inspections was widespread or isolated. The women don't debate it at all. They remember. There's a strange economy of time at work. The faster the inspection, the more women processed. The more women processed, the more the city can claim diligence. Speed becomes virtue. Care becomes inefficiency. You joke quietly that if they could inspect you by mail, they would. The joke lands. It always does. You notice how men remain largely untouched by this system. Clients are assumed to be vectors only in theory, never in policy. Their freedom of movement remains intact. Yours becomes conditional. It's like being blamed for a fire while being handed all the buckets, and watching the arsonists walk past. Whistling. Over time, the inspections start to leave marks beyond the physical. You feel a low-level dread whenever someone mentions schedules or lists. Your body tenses automatically at certain smells. Certain rooms. This isn't weakness. It's memory. The body keeps better records than the city ever will. Occasionally, someone fails an inspection. The response is swift and unkind. You're pulled from rotation. whispered about, advised to rest somewhere else. That somewhere else is rarely specified, and help doesn't follow. The district doesn't pause to consider what happens next. Once you're removed from circulation, you're no longer the system's concern. Historians still debate what became of women excluded this way. The silence afterward answers that question more clearly than any archive. You step back onto the street afterward. Light-headed, blinking in the sun, the city looks the same as it did before. Music plays. Men laugh. Life continues. There's something surreal about it. Like emerging from underwater and realizing no one noticed you were gone. The inspections were supposed to make things safer. That's what everyone says. But safety isn't created by rituals alone. It's created by understanding, equity, and care, none of which fit neatly into forms. You adjust your clothes, take a steadying breath, and move on. Being cleared doesn't feel like relief. It feels like a temporary permission to keep risking everything. Death doesn't arrive with ceremony in Storyville. It slips in quietly, like someone who knows they're not supposed to stay long. One day a woman is there, powdering her face, complaining about the heat, laughing at a joke that isn't very funny, and then she isn't. Her absence is noticed briefly, acknowledged in passing, and absorbed. The system is very good at absorption. You start to recognize the pattern. A woman gets sick. She works through it because rest doesn't pay. She misses an inspection, or fails one. She's told to take time away. She leaves, carrying her things in a bundle that's too small for a whole life. Sometimes you hear she's gone home. Sometimes she's at a hospital. Sometimes there's no explanation at all. Weeks later, someone mentions her name in the past tense. And that's that. The city keeps records, but they're selective. Death certificates list vague causes: fever, decline, weakness. Prostitution is rarely mentioned. Responsibility is never assigned. If a woman dies after medical treatment, it's framed as unfortunate. If she dies without treatment, it's inevitable. Either way, the story ends neatly. Historians still debate how many deaths in Storyville were preventable versus unavoidable given medical knowledge at the time. The gap between those categories is where most women disappear. What strikes you is how quickly death becomes ordinary. Not less sad, just less surprising. You stop reacting outwardly because reacting doesn't change anything. Grief here is private and rushed. There's always another night, another client, another bill. The district doesn't slow down for mourning. It barely notices. Funerals, when they happen, are small, quiet, often paid for collectively. Coins gathered discreetly from women who can't really spare them. Sometimes there's no body to bury. Just a rumor and a memory. You stand there, hat in hand, listening to words that try to sound comforting. They never quite land. Death in Storyville isn't shocking. It's procedural. There's a strange imbalance in how different deaths are remembered. A man dying in a brawl might get a headline. A woman dying of infection gets a line item. If she's black, she might not get that. Names blur. Ages are guessed. Lives compress into footnotes. Historians still debate whether mortality rates among prostitutes were exaggerated by reformers or undercounted by officials. From where you stand, undercounted feels more accurate. You've seen too many women vanish without paperwork following them. You notice how people talk around death instead of about it. She wasn't well. She had trouble. It caught up with her. Language smooths the edges, making it easier to move on. No one says what it is. The system doesn't like specifics. Specifics point fingers. There's also fear, not of dying. Exactly. But of dying unnoticed. Of becoming one of those names no one says anymore. You catch yourself wondering who would remember you. Who would notice if your bed stayed empty? It's not a pleasant thought. So you learn to push it aside. Worrying about erasure doesn't prevent it. The district has its own quiet rituals for coping. A drink poured out and left untouched. A song played slower than usual. A joke told a little too loudly. As if volume could fill the gap. Humor shows up again, stubborn and inappropriate. Someone quips that at least she doesn't have to stand in line for inspections anymore. The laugh that follows is thin, but real. You realize that death here isn't just an end. It's a mechanism. It creates space. New women arrive. Rooms are reassigned. The machine keeps running. There's something chilling in how efficient it all is. Storyville doesn't need to be cruel intentionally. Indifference does most of the work. Historians still debate whether the closure of Storyville later reduced these quiet deaths or simply displaced them. But standing here now, watching another absence settle into the routine, you understand something essential. When a system depends on people being replaceable, it also depends on them being forgettable. You walk past a house where a window is dark tonight. Curtains drawn. No sign explains why. No announcement marks the change. Tomorrow, the lights will be on again. Someone else inside. The district abhors a vacancy. As you move on, the weight of it follows you, not dramatic, not crushing, just persistent. Death here doesn't shout. It whispers, over and over, until it sounds like background noise. And that, somehow, is the most frightening part. The newspapers love Storyville the way people love storms, from a safe distance. With just enough fascination to feel alive. You see headlines flicker past on street corners. Bold fonts promising scandal, danger, excitement. Inside, the articles perform a careful dance. They hint, they sensationalize. They never quite accuse the right people. When something happens, an assault too visible to ignore, a death too sudden to smooth over, the press swoops in. Language swells. Details blur. Women become archetypes rather than individuals. A fallen girl. A tragic figure. Names are optional. Context is negotiable. Responsibility dissolves into atmosphere, as if the city itself committed the act by accident. You read about yourself, indirectly, not you specifically, but someone like you. The description never matches any one woman, which makes it safer to consume. Readers can feel concern without discomfort, pity without obligation. The articles end with moral commentary, usually aimed sideways. Vice is dangerous. They warn. The city must be vigilant. Men, curiously, remain supporting characters in these stories, despite being central to every event. There's an art to what the newspapers omit. They rarely mention the inspections unless praising them. They rarely question medical practices. They almost never follow up. A story breaks, then disappears, replaced by the next distraction. Historians still debate whether the press drove reform or merely reflected public appetite. Watching how quickly yesterday's tragedy becomes today's wrapping paper, you lean toward appetite. You notice how reporters move through the district. Notebooks out, expressions rehearsed, They ask questions that sound sympathetic but steer answers toward familiar conclusions. They don't want complexity. Complexity doesn't fit in columns. They want quotes that confirm what readers already believe, that women like you are both victims and warnings. Never participants in a system designed above your head. Sometimes the press does something even stranger. It romanticizes the district. Stories about music, charm, colorful characters. Storyville becomes exotic, almost whimsical. Tourists arrive with expectations shaped by ink and rumor. The danger is edited out, replaced by atmosphere. You wonder how many readers imagine lace curtains and laughter. Never the quiet mornings after someone disappears. You overhear a woman joke that if she dies dramatically enough, she might finally get her name spelled right in print. The joke lands harder than intended. Being seen only at your worst is its own kind of invisibility. Historians still debate whether sensational coverage increased sympathy for women in the district or reinforced stereotypes. Standing here, you feel the weight of being both watched and misunderstood. There's also fear of the press. A bad article can close a house. A moral panic can bring raids. Madams cultivate relationships with editors just as carefully as with police. Favorable coverage is encouraged. Silence is purchased. You realize that information, like everything else in Storyville, is negotiated. You read one article that almost gets it right. It mentions economic pressure. It hints at hypocrisy. It stops short of naming power. The tone is cautious, as if the writer can see the shape of the problem but not step fully into it. The paper prints it anyway, tucked between advertisements. The next day, no one mentions it. The moment passes. Newspapers create memory, but only the kind that fits neatly. They decide which stories linger and which evaporate. You start to understand that erasure doesn't always look like silence. Sometimes it looks like noise, so much of it that nothing distinct can survive. As you fold the paper and move on, you feel a familiar frustration settle in. Being talked about is not the same as being heard. Being seen is not the same as being understood. The press claims to shine light on Storyville, but it angles that light carefully, avoiding the shadows that might implicate the wrong people. You walk past a stack of discarded papers, already damp from the night air. Yesterday's outrage is today's trash. The city keeps moving. Stories pile up, then disappear, just like the women they describe. In Storyville, even truth has a shelf life. And it's shorter than you are. You start to notice who always gets to leave. Not dramatically, not triumphantly, just easily. Men step out of Storyville and re-enter their lives with barely a ripple. Jackets straightened, hats adjusted, stories compartmentalized. Whatever happened inside the district is treated like a coat they can hang up at the door and forget until the next time they need it. Clients talk about risk as if it's theoretical. A bad night, a scare, something to joke about later over drinks. They worry about money, reputation, inconvenience, rarely about disease, and almost never about consequences that might follow them home. If they fall ill, they see private doctors. If rumors start, they travel. Mobility is protection, and they have plenty of it. You see the pattern repeat endlessly. A man arrives tense, restless, entitled. He leaves relaxed, lighter somehow. The transaction is complete. Whatever fear existed has been transferred, quietly, onto you. It's like a relay race where the baton is risk, and you never get to drop it. Historians still debate how much clients understood the danger they posed versus how much they simply didn't care. Watching them button their coats and disappear, the distinction feels generous. The law supports this exit strategy beautifully. There are no registries for clients, no mandatory exams, no social penalties that stick. Even when a man is known to frequent Storyville, it's framed as indulgence, not deviance. Respectability bends around him like a well-tailored suit. You notice how quickly the city forgives what it quietly depends on. There's a particularly bitter irony in how clients discuss responsibility. Some speak earnestly about women needing protection, even reform. Others complain about inspections, as if they're the ones being inconvenienced. A few insist they're doing you a favor by providing income. You listen, nodding, because arguing wouldn't change the outcome and might worsen it. Silence, once again, is the safer option. You overhear a man say he'd never let his daughter near a place like this. The comment floats there, absurd and unchallenged. He doesn't see the contradiction. He doesn't have to. Storyville exists so that women like you absorb what he wants to keep far from his own life. Historians still debate whether client behavior changed over time in response to reform efforts. From where you stand, habits look stubborn. When clients do face consequences, they're often indirect: a marriage strained, a reputation nicked, a health scare handled discreetly. The system cushions them. Even illness doesn't carry the same weight. A man with symptoms is treated as unfortunate. A woman with the same symptoms is treated as evidence. The narrative splits cleanly along gender lines. You begin to realize that the district functions as a kind of moral laundering service. Men enter with desires they don't want to acknowledge publicly. They leave cleansed of responsibility. The mess left behind inside the rooms. The city congratulates itself on maintaining order. Everyone pretends this is normal. There's a dark joke that circulates. Storyville is the only place where men come to lose control and leave feeling more in control than ever. The joke earns a quiet laugh because it's painfully accurate. Power, here, flows in one direction. Risk flows in the other. You watch a familiar client walk away one morning, humming softly, the sun just beginning to warm the street. He looks content, healthy, free. You wonder how many women will cross his path without ever knowing what he carries, physically, socially, morally. The thought makes your chest tighten. Not with anger exactly, but with exhaustion. Historians still debate whether targeting prostitution rather than clients was a deliberate choice or a blind spot shaped by culture. Standing here, watching another man vanish into the city, you feel the answer in your bones. Systems don't overlook power by accident. They orbit it. You turn back toward the district as the day begins to reset. The lights dim. The streets empty. The city pretends nothing happened. Clients have returned to their lives. And you are still here, holding the consequences they left behind. In Storyville, men walk free not because they are innocent, but because the system was built to make sure they always could. You start hearing the word reform more often now. It floats through conversations like a promise that's been passed around too many times to feel solid. Reform committees meet, petitions circulate, speeches are made about decency, public health, and the future of the city. From the outside, it sounds like momentum. From where you're standing, it feels like weather, something happening above you, largely indifferent to whether you get wet. Reformers tend to speak in abstractions. They talk about cleaning up vice and protecting society, as if society were a delicate object and you were the grime clinging to it. Their plans focus on visibility, not safety, on appearances, not outcomes. Close this house, move those women, draw a sharper line. Historians still debate whether reform movements genuinely aim to reduce harm or simply to relocate it. The proposals themselves lean heavily toward relocation. You notice how rarely reformers ask women like you what you need. When they do, the questions are framed narrowly. Do you want to be saved? Do you regret your choices? Would you like to leave? These aren't real questions. They're checkpoints, designed to sort you into categories that justify pre-written solutions. If your answers don't fit, they're politely ignored. Some reforms look compassionate on paper. Increased inspections, curfews, mandatory treatment. In practice, they tighten control without adding support. More rules, fewer exits. You feel the pressure build incrementally. Each new measure promises safety but delivers surveillance. Historians still debate whether incremental reform improved conditions temporarily. You feel the word temporarily doing a lot of work there. There are moments when reform feels almost sincere. A shelter opens. A job training program is announced. A handful of women manage to leave, at least for a while. Their stories are held up as proof that the system works. The ones who return quietly are not discussed. Failure is treated as personal weakness rather than structural gravity. You attend a meeting once. Standing at the back, listening, the room is full of earnest faces. People nod gravely at each other. Someone says that the city cannot tolerate moral decay. Someone else says women must be guided back to respectability. You wait for someone to mention housing, healthcare, wages. No one does. Historians still debate whether reforms stalled because of limited resources or lack of imagination. Listening to this, you suspect imagination was the scarcer resource. There's also resistance, from business owners, from officials, from anyone who benefits from Storyville's efficiency. Reform threatens profits. It threatens predictability. So it's slowed, softened, compromised. A rule here, an exception there. The district adapts. It always does. Systems designed to extract value are remarkably flexible when challenged. You notice how reforms often increase risk in the short term. Crackdowns push work underground. Clients become more secretive, more demanding. Violence spikes quietly. When things get worse, reformers point to the chaos as proof that vice is dangerous. The logic loops neatly, never landing on itself as the cause. There's a bitter humor among the women. Someone jokes that reform is like a doctor who treats a broken leg by rearranging the furniture. The room laughs. Laughter. Again. Does the work explanation can't? You've learned that reforms aimed at your behavior rarely consider your survival. Historians still debate whether reform movements laid the groundwork for future protections. Maybe they did. Maybe seeds were planted that would sprout later. Standing here now, you can't live in maybes. You live in nights, inspections, rooms that lock from the outside. Reform, for you, is an idea that hasn't figured out how to cross the street. As the talk grows louder, you feel a familiar tension. Change is coming, that much is clear. But change doesn't automatically mean improvement. It just means movement. And movement, in this city, usually happens to you, not for you. You step back into the flow of Storyville. Reform echoing faintly behind you. Whatever happens next, you know one thing for certain. If reform doesn't center the people most at risk, it won't save them. It will just rearrange where they disappear. The closure doesn't arrive with mercy. It arrives with notices, deadlines, and the faint satisfaction of people who believe a problem has been solved because it's been moved. One day, the word reform is everywhere. The next, it's shut down. Storyville, the city decides, has outlived its usefulness. Officially, the reasons sound noble enough. National pressure, military concerns, moral embarrassment. The language is clean and confident, as if closing doors automatically opens futures. You hear politicians speak about protecting young men, preserving decency, restoring order. No one asks where the women are supposed to go. That question hangs unanswered, heavy as the humid air. The order is clear. The district will close. Not gradually, not gently. A date is set, and suddenly time speeds up. Madams scramble. Musicians look for new rooms. Clients vanish early, sensing inconvenience. And you, along with hundreds of others, are expected to evaporate on schedule. There's a strange quiet panic in the days leading up to it. Rooms empty out. Houses that once hummed feel hollow. Laughter sounds forced, like it's trying to convince itself. Women pack belongings into small bundles again, the same way they always do when stability proves temporary. The city calls this progress. You call it déjà vu. What's rarely mentioned in the official narrative is that Storyville didn't appear because the city was immoral. It appeared because demand existed, and still does. Closing the district doesn't erase that demand. It just dissolves the fragile, flawed structure that at least made it visible. Historians still debate whether officials understood this or chose to ignore it. Watching how quickly the city washes its hands, you suspect the latter. Some women manage to leave town. Others try to find work elsewhere, factories, kitchens, laundries, only to discover wages that won't cover rent or food. A few are taken in by relatives who speak in careful, conditional tones. Many have nowhere to go at all. The city offers no comprehensive plan, no safety net. The same system that regulated you now releases you, unprotected, and congratulates itself. There's an irony in how quickly the moral tone shifts. The same voices that once argued for containment now praise eradication. Storyville becomes a mistake, an embarrassment, a cautionary tale. The women who lived there are not invited to participate in this retelling. You are edited out, replaced by abstraction. Violence doesn't disappear with the district. It scatters. Work moves into back rooms, alleys, rented houses with no oversight at all. Inspections stop. Whatever thin barrier existed between you and the worst outcomes collapses. Historians still debate whether closing Storyville reduced harm or amplified it by driving everything underground. From where you stand, harm feels closer now, less predictable, more personal. You walk past a house that once glowed at night. Now dark and shuttered, the street looks ordinary, respectable. That's the goal. The city prefers its problems invisible. You wonder how many lives will fracture quietly to maintain this new illusion. There's a moment, brief, bitter, when you realize Storyville's closure isn't an ending. It's a transition. The city hasn't learned anything. It's just changed tactics. The same forces remain: poverty, demand, hypocrisy, indifference. Only the geography has shifted. As you step away from the district for the last time, there's no ceremony, no acknowledgement, no accounting, just the sense of being released into uncertainty by a city eager to forget you existed. Storyville is gone. The sentence, for you, is not. When Storyville closes, the city expects you to vanish with it. Not dramatically, just quietly, efficiently, without leaving residue. There are no directions given, no maps handed out. You're simply no longer supposed to be where you were. The assumption seems to be that once the doors shut, everyone inside will somehow rearrange their lives into something acceptable. You try. Most women do. You walk the city during the day, looking for work that doesn't require secrecy or risk. Kitchens want experience and references. Laundries want strength and obedience. Factories want speed and youth. Wages are laughably low. Hours are brutal. The math doesn't work. Rent still needs paying. Food still costs money. Illness doesn't pause out of respect for reform. Some employers recognize you, not openly, never openly, but in the way conversations end too quickly. Stories travel, reputations cling. Storyville may be closed, but its shadow moves freely. Historians still debate whether stigma proved more damaging than poverty in the aftermath. You stop debating and start calculating. How long before you run out of options? Housing becomes its own battle. Boarding houses tighten rules. Landlords ask more questions. Some places flatly refuse women without family or steady employment. You learn to pack light, because you don't know how long any arrangement will last. Stability, once rare, becomes almost mythical. Work doesn't disappear, it mutates. Sex work moves into private apartments, hotels, streets farther from the center. Without the district's loose structure, there's less predictability and far more danger. No madams, no known safe houses, no routines to rely on. Clients set terms more aggressively. Violence spikes quietly. Inspections are gone, but so is even the illusion of oversight. Historians still debate whether women were safer inside Storyville or after its closure. Living through the aftermath, you feel the answer in your bones. Some women drift into other cities, chasing rumors of opportunity. Others stay, bound by family, illness, or lack of fare. A few disappear entirely. The city records these movements poorly. If at all, mobility, once forced, now becomes fragmented. No one tracks outcomes. No one checks in. Charities step in unevenly. Shelters fill quickly. Rules multiply. Curfews, prayers, labor requirements. Help comes with surveillance attached. If you break a rule, you're out. There's no margin for error. Despite how error-prone survival is, historians still debate whether post-Storyville aid efforts were overwhelmed or underfunded. Either way, the gap swallows people whole. You notice how public attention fades fast. Once the district is gone, so is the urgency. Newspapers move on. Reformers declare partial victory. The women left adrift don't fit the celebratory narrative. They become inconvenient evidence that closing a place doesn't close a problem. There's a particular loneliness in this phase. In Storyville, danger was shared. Afterward, it's individualized. You no longer have a crowd to disappear into. Each decision feels heavier. Each risk feels more personal. You miss the predictability of something you once hated. That realization surprises you. You hear people say the city is cleaner now. Safer. More respectable. You look around and see the same struggles playing out behind different doors. The language has changed. The outcomes haven't. Historians still debate whether Storyville's closure marked progress. From where you stand, progress feels theoretical. You keep moving, because stopping invites questions, and questions still have weight. The city didn't build a path forward. It simply removed a container. Everything that was inside spills outward, and you're left navigating the mess without a map. Storyville is gone, but the forces that fed it are alive and well. And you are still caught in their current. Time doesn't heal the way people promise it will. It just rearranges the damage. After Storyville closes, illness doesn't politely pack up and leave with the district. It lingers, quiet, stubborn, and deeply uninterested in reform narratives. You feel it in your body first, before it ever shows up in conversation. Symptoms that were once monitored, however clumsily, now unfold in isolation. There are no inspections anymore, but there's also no access to care unless you can pay or persuade. Clinics are wary. Doctors ask questions that sound neutral but aren't. Once your past is suspected, treatment becomes slower, rougher, more expensive. Historians still debate whether medical stigma outweighed medical ignorance in this period. Standing in a waiting room that suddenly feels colder. You don't need a debate to understand the outcome. Disease carries a double weight now. There's the physical toll, the pain, the fatigue, the uncertainty, and then there's the social one. Illness marks you as irresponsible, contagious, morally suspect. Even people who once depended on your work keep their distance. You learn how to hide symptoms better than ever. Coughs are swallowed, rashes are covered, weakness is denied. Survival requires performance. Even now, the city's memory of Storyville begins to soften almost immediately. What was once framed as dangerous becomes quaint. People reminisce about the music, the characters, the color it brought to New Orleans. You hear these conversations with a strange detachment, as if they're talking about a play you were forced to perform in. The suffering is edited out, replaced by nostalgia. Historians still debate how quickly this mythologizing took hold. From your perspective, it's immediate and painful. Stigma doesn't fade with distance or time. It adapts. You notice it in the way people hesitate before answering your questions. In the way doors close politely instead of slamming. In the careful tone of those who offer help without trust. Storyville may be gone, but its label sticks. A quiet brand that follows you from room to room. There's a particular cruelty in how illness becomes proof of past wrongdoing. A sick woman is assumed to have earned it. Sympathy dries up fast. Charity becomes conditional. You start to realize that recovery isn't just about healing your body. It's about convincing the world you deserve to be healed. That's a much harder task. You hear rumors of cures. As always, new treatments, new theories. Some are better than what came before. Many aren't. Access remains uneven. Those with money and reputation improve. Those without linger. Historians still debate whether advances in medicine eventually reached women like you in time to matter. watching who gets better and who doesn't. The pattern feels grimly consistent. The isolation wears on you. In Storyville, you were surrounded by people who understood without explanation. Now, understanding is rare and expensive. You miss the shorthand glances, the shared humor, the unspoken agreements. Loneliness settles in, heavy and persistent, making even small tasks feel monumental. And yet, you keep going, because you have to, because stopping isn't an option. You learn new routes through the city, new ways to blend in, new strategies for avoiding questions. Adaptation becomes muscle memory. Historians still debate whether women who survived this period were resilient or simply trapped in motion. You don't bother choosing between those words. They feel too neat. As the years pass, the memory of Storyville becomes something people argue about academically, nostalgically, safely. For you, it's never theoretical. It's in your joints when the weather shifts. In the names you don't say anymore. In the way your body reacts before your mind catches up. The district may be closed, but its consequences are not. They live on, quietly, persistently, inside you. You begin to notice the shift not in laws or streets, but in stories. Storyville starts to soften at the edges. Like a photograph left too long in the sun. People talk about it differently now. Less danger, more charm, more music. The hard parts fade first. The easy parts linger. You hear someone call it romantic. The word lands oddly, like it belongs to a different language. Romantic suggests choice. It suggests leisure. It suggests people were there because they wanted to be. You almost laugh, then stop yourself. Laughter feels like agreement, and you don't agree. You were there because gravity pulled you there. And gravity is not a love story. The city begins to package its memory. Guidebooks mention Storyville in passing, focusing on jazz and colorful characters. Names of madams survive. Names of musicians survive. Names of women who worked, suffered, and died do not. Historians still debate whether this selective memory was intentional or simply convenient. Standing inside the gap it leaves behind, convenience feels like intent wearing a polite mask. You notice how nostalgia works. It filters out pain the way a lens filters light. People remember the glow, not the heat, the sound, not the cost. Storyville becomes a mood rather than a place, a shorthand for indulgence without consequence. You want to interrupt and say consequences were the only constant. But stories don't ask permission from the people they erase. Even scholars begin to frame debates carefully. Was Storyville progressive for its time? Did it reduce harm? Was it inevitable? These questions circle endlessly, neat and controlled. They rarely ask what it felt like to live there day after day. Knowing your health, safety, and future were negotiable. Lived experience resists tidy framing. That makes it inconvenient. You catch yourself questioning your own memory. That's the most unsettling part. When enough people repeat a softened version of events, even the truth starts to feel exaggerated. You remind yourself of the absences, the inspections, the quiet deaths, the way doors closed when you needed them open. Memory, you realize, requires maintenance. If you don't tend it, someone else will reshape it for you. There's a modern comparison that almost fits. It's like watching a disaster site turn into a tourist attraction. Plaques go up, context gets abbreviated, visitors take photographs where people once lost everything. The past becomes consumable. You wonder who benefits from that transformation. You suspect you already know. Historians still debate whether mythologizing Storyville has obscured its harms or simply reframed them. From where you stand, reframing feels like erasure with better manners. The danger of myth isn't that it lies outright. It's that it tells a partial truth loudly enough to drown out the rest. You hear jazz played now in concert halls. Celebrated as heritage, the music deserves it. The people who made it deserve it. You think about the rooms where it was born, crowded, tense, alive, and how few of those spaces are acknowledged. Creativity survives. Context does not. This pattern feels familiar. As the years move on, Storyville becomes a reference point rather than a wound. For others, for you, it remains both. You carry it in fragments, sounds, smells, habits you can't quite unlearn. When someone romanticizes it, you feel a small, quiet anger, not sharp enough to argue, just steady enough to remind you what was lost. You realize that memory is another kind of power. Whoever controls the story controls what lessons get learned. Storyville's story, stripped of its consequences, becomes safe to admire, dangerous to repeat. Historians still debate whether remembering imperfectly is better than forgetting entirely. You think of the women who vanished without names and decide that imperfect memory is only acceptable if it still tells the truth. You keep walking through a city that has learned how to remember selectively. The streets look cleaner now. The stories sound nicer. The cost remains unpaid. And you understand something deeply unsettling. When suffering is aestheticized, it becomes easier to recreate. Storyville may be gone, but the myth of it is just getting started. The debates start long after the dust has settled, which is always how it goes. Once the bodies are buried, once the streets are repaved, once the women who remember have aged or gone quiet, the questions finally feel safe enough to ask. Was Storyville a necessary evil? Was it protective in its own broken way? Was it better than nothing? You hear these questions echoed in lecture halls, newspapers, polite conversations where no one lowers their voice anymore. They're framed as intellectual puzzles, stripped of urgency. The people asking them don't feel watched while they speak. They don't feel their answers might determine whether they eat tomorrow. That distance matters. Some argue Storyville reduced violence by containing it. Others claim it limited disease through inspections. Charts are drawn, numbers compared, context trimmed. You notice how easily debate leans on what can be measured, not on what was endured. Pain that doesn't leave neat records becomes theoretical. Historians still debate which datasets are reliable, which reports exaggerated, which voices should be trusted. You wonder why the women themselves are rarely considered authoritative sources. There's a particular comfort in arguing both sides. It allows everyone to sound thoughtful without committing to responsibility. If Storyville was both harmful and helpful, then no one has to answer for its worst outcomes. Ambiguity becomes a shield. You recognize the move immediately. It's the same logic that protected clients, doctors, and officials while you were inside the district. Complexity, when weaponized, excuses power. You listen to one discussion that frames Storyville as an early attempt at harm reduction. The phrase sounds modern, progressive, reassuring. You almost admire the optimism. Almost. Then you remember how harm reduction without respect, equity, or consent simply shifts harm onto the most vulnerable. Historians still debate whether intent matters more than outcome. Your body votes decisively for outcome. Another argument insists Storyville was doomed by the ignorance of its time. They didn't know better. People say, medicine was crude. Attitudes were different. You accept part of that. You also remember how often women were ignored even when they did know something was wrong. Ignorance explains mistakes. It doesn't explain indifference. That difference matters. You notice how often the debate centers on men's behavior, whether Storyville kept them from causing trouble elsewhere. The framing is subtle but clear. Women remain the variable, the terrain over which solutions are tested. You're not surprised. Systems rarely reimagine themselves around those with the least power. Historians still debate whether a different approach could have worked. Few ask whether anyone tried sincerely. There's a strange irony in how much energy goes into debating a place that no longer exists. While similar dynamics play out quietly in the present, different cities, different language, same patterns, concentration, blame, selective enforcement. You feel a flicker of recognition when modern comparisons surface. Quickly dismissed as oversimplifications. Oversimplification, you've learned, is often code for discomfort. You realize that debates like these are not neutral. They shape what future policies will look like. If Storyville is remembered as flawed but necessary, then repetition becomes easier to justify. If it's remembered as a cautionary failure, different questions might be asked next time. Memory, once again, becomes leverage. Historians still debate whether Storyville should be judged by the standards of its time or ours. You find that question oddly hollow. Suffering doesn't change meaning just because a calendar page turns. A body hurt in 1895 feels pain just as sharply as one hurt today. Standards may shift, consequences do not. You step away from the conversation feeling tired in a familiar way. Not angry, not surprised, just aware that debates often begin where accountability ends. The past becomes a sandbox for ideas, and the people who lived it are reduced to variables. As you move on, one thought stays with you, steady and unresolved. If the story of Storyville remains unsettled, it's not because the evidence is unclear. It's because the truth is inconvenient. And inconvenient truths rarely win debates without a fight. You start noticing the echoes long before anyone names them. They show up in the way cities talk about zones, about keeping certain activities contained so the rest of society can feel clean. They show up in policy language that sounds technical but lands personally. Different century, different vocabulary, same familiar rhythm. You hear modern arguments that sound eerily polished versions of the old ones. Concentration reduces harm. Regulation makes things safer. Visibility allows control. You don't dismiss these ideas outright. You've lived long enough to know nothing is simple. But your body remembers what happens when containment becomes an excuse not to care. Historians still debate whether historical comparisons are fair or overstated. Standing inside the pattern, fairness feels secondary to recognition. You see how stigma continues to do most of the work. Label a group as risky, immoral, or disposable, and suddenly extraordinary measures feel reasonable. Surveillance becomes protection. Control becomes care. Responsibility shifts downward, away from systems and onto individuals with the fewest options. You recognize the move instantly. It hasn't changed much, just learned better manners. There's a modern joke that progress means doing the same thing with better branding. You almost laugh, then stop. The joke hits too close. Storyville wasn't just a place, it was a blueprint. One that taught cities how to benefit from marginalization while denying ownership of the outcome. You see versions of it everywhere once you know how to look. Historians still debate whether drawing these parallels risks oversimplifying the past. You understand the concern. Context matters. Time matters. But patterns matter too. When the same groups bear the same risks across generations, coincidence stops being a convincing explanation. You notice how often modern discussions center on efficiency rather than dignity. What reduces visible harm? What reassures the majority? Rarely. What actually keeps people alive, healthy, and free to choose differently? That question is more expensive. It requires investment rather than containment. You remember how cheaply Storyville solved the city's immediate discomfort, and how costly that solution was for everyone trapped inside it. You think about how quickly systems forget lessons that implicate them. It's easier to remember the music than the math. Easier to celebrate culture than confront exploitation. The past becomes a cautionary tale only if people are willing to see themselves in it. Most prefer distance. There's a moment when you realize something quietly devastating. Progress doesn't fail because people don't know better. It fails because knowing better asks for sacrifice from those who benefit most. Storyville ended not when women were dying, but when the district embarrassed the wrong people. That detail echoes forward more clearly than any policy debate. You walk through a modern street now, cleaner, brighter, confident in its improvements, and feel that familiar tension between surface and structure. Some things are better, truly better. Medicine improves, rights expand, voices multiply, and yet, the instinct to solve discomfort by relocating it persists. The instinct to blame the visible persists. Historians still debate whether societies genuinely learn from places like Storyville. You think learning happens unevenly. When pressure makes it unavoidable. You pause, breathing in air that feels cooler, safer. You're grateful for that. Gratitude doesn't erase memory, though. It sharpens it. It makes you wonder who is currently absorbing risk so others can feel comfortable. Who is being debated instead of listened to? Who is living inside a solution designed without them? As you move on, you understand that Storyville isn't just a chapter in a history book. It's a mirror that keeps reappearing, angled slightly differently each time. Whether people recognize it depends on where they're standing and how much they're willing to see. The city changes. The names change. The logic lingers. By now, the story has slowed, not because there's nothing left to say, but because some truths arrive quietly. They don't crash in, they settle. You feel them in the pauses between thoughts. In the way your body reacts before your mind does. Loud lessons announce themselves. The most important ones whisper. You think about the women whose names you never learned. Faces that blur together now. Not because they didn't matter, but because there were so many. Each one carried a life that extended far beyond the room she worked in, memories. Preferences. Small habits that never made it into records. History rarely notices quiet lives. It prefers grand events, decisive moments, clean endings. Storyville offers none of those if you look closely. The lesson you keep returning to isn't about vice or morality. It's about how systems decide whose suffering is acceptable. In 1890s New Orleans, the answer was clear, even if it was never stated outright. Certain women could be risked. Certain deaths could be tolerated. Certain lives could be shortened so others could feel safe, entertained, or righteous. Historians still debate whether this calculation was conscious or unconscious. Living inside it, you felt its precision daily. You notice how easy it is, even now, to slip into abstraction, to talk about conditions instead of people, outcomes instead of lives. Distance makes that easier. Time makes it tempting. You resist, gently but firmly, by remembering specific moments. The way someone laughed too loud. The way someone always fixed her hair twice. The way someone vanished without ceremony. Memory becomes an act of quiet defiance. There's a modern instinct to ask what could have saved these women. Better laws? Better medicine? Better morals? All of those matter. But the question feels incomplete. What might have saved them is being believed, being valued beyond their usefulness, being seen as people rather than problems to manage. Those changes are harder to legislate, which is why they're often postponed indefinitely. You realize that survival itself was an achievement here. Not glamorous, not celebrated, just stubborn. Endurance without applause. Many women did not get that far. The ones who did carried lessons forward invisibly, shaping how they navigated every system that followed. Resilience is often praised without acknowledging the conditions that made it necessary. As the city around you grows quieter in memory, you feel the weight lift slightly. Not because the story ends well, but because you've reached the part where understanding replaces urgency. The danger has passed, but the meaning remains. That's often how history works when you let it breathe. You take one more look back, not to romanticize, not to soften, but to acknowledge. These were real lives, real costs, real consequences. If the lesson is quiet, it's also clear. When a society builds solutions that require people to be disposable, the damage doesn't stay contained. It spreads, slowly, persistently, and it waits for someone to notice. The night feels gentler now, as if the city itself has decided to lower its voice. You're no longer walking through Storyville, or even through New Orleans as it was then. You're walking through the space that stories leave behind when they finally slow down enough to rest. You notice how your breathing has changed, longer, steadier. The tension that once lived permanently in your shoulders has eased. Just a little. That's what happens when danger moves into the past. It doesn't vanish, but it loses its grip. You can look at it without flinching. You think again about how ordinary everything looked while it was happening. That may be the most unsettling part. There were no villains twirling mustaches. No singular moment where the city chose cruelty outright. There were meetings, policies, assumptions, small decisions repeated until they hardened into fate. Historians still debate when exactly Storyville became a death sentence. You understand now that it wasn't one moment. It was the accumulation. You remember the music, because of course you do. You remember the jokes, the small kindnesses, the fragments of warmth that survived despite everything. Those details matter. They don't redeem the system, but they honor the people inside it. Even in the worst conditions, humanity finds ways to surface quietly. The city moves on, as cities always do, Streets change names. Buildings are torn down or repurposed. Tourists walk past places that once held entire lives without knowing it. That's not a failure of memory so much as a reminder of how much history we carry unknowingly beneath our feet. You feel the story loosening its hold now. The way a song fades at the end of the night. Nothing abrupt, just a gradual softening. The sharp edges blur. The lessons remain, but they no longer demand your full attention. They trust you to keep them. You've traveled far enough for tonight. There's nothing left to prove. Nothing left to survive. Only rest. The images dim. The sounds recede. The city exhales. You are safe now. The story slows completely here. Sentences stretching. Thoughts drifting like fog over water. Nothing new enters the frame. The past settles back where it belongs. No longer pressing, no longer urgent. You don't need to carry it anymore, not tonight. Your breathing evens out. The weight of names, places, and arguments dissolves into something softer. Less defined. History becomes distance. Distance becomes quiet. If any part of the story lingers, let it be the reminder that people mattered, even when systems pretended they didn't. Let that thought fade gently, without effort. There's nothing you need to do now. No lesson to hold onto tightly. Just rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.